the historical period zombie blockbuster. Kingdom is a perfect blend of zombie horror and a power struggle within the royal court. This is what sets it apart from other zombie films. Released in 2019, it remains a hit, penned by a renowned screenwriter known for his acclaimed detective series. The political intrigue that runs throughout the episodes contains a series of thrilling situations, alongside incredible and unpredictable twists. The film is set in the Joseon era, when the country is threatened by internal and external enemies and affected by natural disasters. Disease and poverty leave the people in misery. The film opens with the Joseon emperor seriously ill, unable to attend state affairs after days of treatment. The film captivates viewers from the very first scene, as the palace is shrouded in a dark and eerie atmosphere. Under the cover of night, royal physician Lee Seung-hui and his apprentice, Dan-I, enter the royal palace to attend to the king. Previously, he warned Dan-I not to look into the king's sleeping chamber, as if concealing something terrifying. Dan-I tremblingly approached and knelt to present the medicine. At the same time, monstrous, guttural growls began emanating from behind the bamboo screen. Before he could react, he was suddenly pulled inside by the king, despite the piercing screams echoing throughout the cold royal palace. The next day, Royal Guard Commander Bam Roman II discovered proclamations written in blood-red ink plastered all over the city. The proclamations declared that the king had passed away and that a new power would take over. To prevent the rumors from spreading throughout the country, the commander ordered the arrest and execution of the entire family of anyone who dared to rebel. Even soldiers who didn't report the proclamations were beheaded on the spot. Ignoring their pleas, a single swift sword stroke severed a bloody head from its neck, and blood spread across the road. Young scholars, the future of the nation, were also suspected, arrested, and brutally interrogated, but they resolutely refused to utter a word. Instead, they denounced the corrupt ruling system, controlled by the Hee-won-cho family, led by Chief State Councilor Cho Hak-ju. Chief State Councilor Cho Hak-ju is a power-hungry man who hoards the wealth of the people to enrich himself, leaving the common people impoverished and starving. Crown Prince Lee Chang, the king's son, had been kneeling for days, begging the young queen to allow him to see his father after 10 days of not knowing his condition. However, Lee Chang was dismissed by the queen, who mocked him, accusing him of harboring hatred towards her and the child she was carrying. If that child is a boy, the prince will inherit the throne. Then, Lee Chang would be deposed, because the queen is the daughter of Chief State Councilor Cho Hak-ju, a member of the Hee-won-cho family, who holds all the power. Standing in the rain, the crown prince was resentful and helpless, as even the palace eunuchs and maids stopped him at the queen's orders. They consider the Hee-won-cho family to be the head of the country. Even as crown prince, he has no power. Lee Chang ordered Mu Young, his personal guard, to steal the royal physician's records of the king's condition, which were kept hidden in the royal infirmary. At the same time, the crown prince himself sneaked into his father's palace. In the eerily silent space, Lee Chang heard a growling sound approaching, and at the same time, smelled a horrific stench mixed with the metallic scent of blood. The dark silhouette of a wild beast gradually appeared behind the door. Unable to conceal his fear, the crown prince readied his staff in a defensive posture. Suddenly, the candlelight flickered out, and silence returned. Lee Chang was caught by Bam Il, the commander of the royal guard, who was also the son of the chief state councilor. He insisted that no monster had appeared and arrogantly pointed his sword at the crown prince, refusing to let him see his father. Could the commander of the royal guard spill royal blood? Ignoring the sword pressed against his neck, Lee Chang stormed into the king's bedroom, where Cho Hak-ju was waiting. He stated that the king was not there, accused Lee Chang of treason, and threatened to kill all the young scholars to extract a confession. Back at his own palace, the guard Mu Young had successfully obtained the records. The king's condition was meticulously monitored and recorded daily by the royal physicians, detailing the severe symptoms of smallpox. The crown prince was stunned to find that the later pages were blank, suspecting that something terrifying was being concealed. Lee Chang, disguised, traveled with his guard hundreds of miles to Dongni in the south to find physician Lee Seung-hui in order to learn the truth. At the Jewelhean clinic, the female physician Seo Bai was struggling with patients starving due to the lack of government supplies. The physician returned, bringing with him the cold corpse of Dan I, covered in bite marks. Everyone mourned and could not hide their fear. Xiao Bai asked the physician about Dan I's death but received no answer. He silently locked himself in his room. Back in Hanyang, the chief state counselor had found evidence that the crown prince had supported young scholars. He disregarded the other high-ranking officials, even threatening them, and ordered the arrest of the crown prince. A young eunuch was beheaded simply for saying he didn't know where the crown prince was. Li Chang, for his part, admitted to Mu Yang that he was indeed a traitor. He had to overthrow the Haiwanqiu family and uncover the truth about the king in order to save the country and himself. A crown prince who was the son of a concubine, not a true crown prince, would die when the queen gave birth to a child. Xiao Bai returned from gathering herbs, completely surprised to see that her patients had meat to eat. Young Xin, a patient there, said that he had hunted a deer to feed everyone. But soon after, Xiao Bai discovered that it was the meat of Dan I after finding a human finger in the bowl of soup that she herself had ladled. Could hunger make people so evil? She angrily confronted young Xin and learned the truth that the country had abandoned small people like them. As the two argued, the patients began to show strange symptoms. They were in pain, convulsed, and then became motionless. The real nightmare had just begun. They gradually woke up like beasts and attacked, devouring the living. The soulless corpses trampled over each other to fight for prey. A red color of blood covered the entire clinic. The terrifying scene closed with a gruesome, dead face behind the door, along with a beast-like growl. Meanwhile, Crown Prince Li Chang, along with his bodyguard Mu Yang, is searching for royal physician Li Seung Hui to uncover the secret behind the king's illness, all while being pursued by the royal army. As night falls, the two men stop to rest by a stream. A small fire is their only source of light amidst the desolate, cold mountains. Mu Yang is busy arranging the firewood he just gathered. He quickly picks it up and begins to grumble about how reckless and imprudent His Highness is, recklessly pushing himself into trouble and, more importantly, committing treason, something that will certainly jeopardize his life. "Another word out of you, and I'll have your entire lineage exterminated," Li Chang says jokingly, putting on a stern face. Mu Yang takes him seriously, recoils in fear, and falls silent. "How can you joke about such a thing?" The two men, each taking a turn, arguing back and forth, eventually burst into laughter. This reveals that the relationship between the Crown Prince and Mu Yang is more than just master and servant. They are like brothers, family. In this difficult situation, they are unaware of the dangers that lie ahead. They are the only people each other can trust and stand shoulder to shoulder with at this time. Their joyous laughter mingles with the hooting of owls, dispelling the silence and cold of the desolate mountain forest. In the morning, the two continue their journey. On the way, Li Chang jokes again that he will have Mu Yang's entire family exterminated if he doesn't hurry up. This time, Mu Yang isn't frightened but instead makes a condition that he be rewarded with food to take back to his pregnant wife. As Mu Yang relentlessly recounts his merits and demands food, the Crown Prince suddenly feels a strange unease at the eerie silence of the forest. Apart from their voices mingling with the babbling of the small stream, there is no sound from any animals, not even insects. A chilling breeze carrying an unsettling atmosphere sweeps past, foreshadowing something ominous ahead. After looking around, they realize this is the Jewelhian Medical Clinic. The gate is secured with large planks of wood and firmly nailed shut. Furthermore, the tiled roof of the surrounding wall is fortified with sharpened bamboo spears, hoes, shovels, and other crude weapons. The tips of the spears are stained with patches of dried blood. To ensure safety, Mu Yang tells the Crown Prince to wait outside while he scouts ahead. Even after removing all the external obstacles, the door still cannot be opened because it seems to be locked from the inside. Mu Yang is forced to climb over the wall. The Crown Prince is stunned by the horrific scene, a dense array of bamboo spears, pointing in one direction. Each spear is stained red with blood and flesh, the ground and floors splattered with large, dark bloodstains. The medical clinic now resembles the ruins of a fierce battle. As he approaches the main building, the Crown Prince steps on a broken plank and falls to the floor. Mu Yang rushes over, worried and asking if he is all right. Before he can become angry, the two are horrified to discover a pile of bloody, putrid corpses under the floor. To conceal the crown prince's identity, Mu Young calls local soldiers and claims that one of the bodies is his younger brother. Removing the corpses is difficult because there are so many of them and they are matted together in large clumps. In total, there are 48 corpses. The soldiers load them onto carts and take them to the magistrate's office. At the same time, an entertainer is performing tightrope walking, one of the unique cultural traditions of Korea. To the accompaniment of traditional music, the artist performs skillful leaps and bounds. At the pavilion nearby, officials are enjoying a celebration of the inauguration of Chom Bayam-pal, a member of the Hwon-cho family who has just been appointed as the new magistrate in Dongni. Some are laughing openly, flattering him, while others are drunkenly reveling to the cheers of the courtesans. The film also pays attention to very small details. We can see a heavily implied message in the image of a plate of meat being carelessly knocked over, observed by a greedy guard. The decadent and pleasure-seeking officials ignore the sorrowful cries of the people tormented by famine. While enjoying the company of courtesans on either side, an attendant urgently rushes in to report the discovery of corpses. Bayam-pal doesn't believe it, and along with the other officials, rushes to the magistrate's office to witness it firsthand. The group is horrified by the rows of bodies lying in the courtyard, covered with mats. Young Shin is suspected of being the culprit because he's been seen collecting bamboo stakes everywhere recently, and they have discovered that he died in battle 3 years ago. To find him, the soldiers arrest all the men who look similar. Because the royal physician's body hasn't been found, Lee Chang thinks he's still alive and goes with Mu Young to find him. Meanwhile, the royal army, led by Bayam-il, is close to arriving and splits up to search for the crown prince. At the royal palace, a corpse wrapped in a white cloth is being secretly transported to the back garden. The body is thrown into the lake, weighed down with stones to ensure it can't float. At the bottom of the lake are countless other corpses in a similar state. It's unimaginable that such a picturesque scene could conceal such a terrible secret. But the truth will always come out. After noticing strange things happening at the palace, a court lady secretly goes to see the chief scholar who holds evidence of the crown prince's treason, but he refuses to hand it over to Cho Hak-ju. If the truth is discovered, they can overthrow the Hwon-cho family, save the crown prince and the young scholars. However, this is extremely difficult because only the royal family can enter. Meanwhile, the crown prince and Mu Young arrive at a small village in Dongni and learn that the female physician Seo Bai is going to the frozen valley to search for a plant called the resurrection plant, a plant that can bring the dead back to life. The two immediately set out. The valley is high in the mountains, so they have to leave their horses behind and walk. True to its name, it is a place as cold as winter, the cliffs covered in the white of ice and snow. They come across Seo Bai, who is diligently digging in a cave. Her whole body is covered in dirt, and her dirty face cannot hide her despair and fatigue. However, when she meets strangers, Seo Bai is very calm, as if the fear she has already experienced is more terrifying than anything. She says that the royal physician Lee Seung-hui did not escape the epidemic. He caused the disaster at Julheon after resurrecting someone in Hanyang. The crown prince is shocked to realize that Cho Hak-ju had plotted to prolong the king's life to wait until a prince was born, with the aim of seizing power. After that, Seo Bai also states that the study of the resurrection plant will bring hope to cure the epidemic. The crown prince goes to Julheon to find the record of the king's condition. Meanwhile, Mu Young goes with Seo Bai to the magistrate's office to confirm that what she said is true. At the same time, Young Shin, having collected bamboo stakes, returns to the medical center and learns that the bodies have been taken out of Julheon. He frantically bursts into the magistrate's office, warning everyone that they must burn all the bodies before they wake up in the evening and attack the living. Recognizing him as the suspect, Bayam-pal ordered Young Shin's arrest. He fought back fiercely against the soldiers, frantically yelling warnings, but of course, no one believed him and assumed he was insane. Holding a burning torch in his hand, Young Shin used it as a weapon to fight off the soldiers while also quickly setting fire to the corpses. However, they were too numerous. After a struggle, he was recaptured. The bewildered villagers tried to extinguish the flames, ignoring his desperate pleas to stop. They didn't want the bodies of their loved ones to be burned. Young Shin was bound and interrogated, but he stubbornly stood by his story. When Bai arrived at the magistrate's office, the sun was setting, and shadows covered the sky. Everyone scoffed at her warnings, dismissing both of them as crazy and imprisoning them. Night fell, and the nightmare began. One of the corpses began to stir, and then slowly rose to its feet. A husband, overjoyed to see his wife awakening, rushed to her side, only to be greeted with a merciless bite. The corpses around them also began to crawl up and attack everyone. Bai and Young Shin, locked in their cell, heard the screams and understood what was happening. Young Shin used all his strength to force the door open and rushed outside. Meanwhile, Li Cheng was greeted by the back of Bayam-il, who was waiting for him at Julian. They engaged in a fierce battle. Bayam-il was slashed across the face, fueling his rage. He swung his sword wildly at Li Cheng, destroying the furniture in the room. The Crown Prince was no match for a commander who had fought in countless battles, and the difference in their abilities became increasingly apparent. The blade of the sword shattered, and the outcome was clear. Suddenly, they heard a strange noise coming from a chest. Bayam-il ordered his men to investigate, and unexpectedly, a ferocious corpse burst out of the chest, killing a soldier. Bayam-il quickly stabbed the zombie through the back with his sword, but it was unaffected. The bloodied face gradually became visible. It was Li Seung-hui, infected with the disease. Bayam-il was forced against the wall. The remaining soldiers managed to lure Li Seung-hui back into the chest and jumped inside to hide. The soldier who had been bitten slowly stood up and lunged forward. Bayam-il slashed at his neck, and the corpse fell and became still. However, he had been careless with Li Seung-hui behind him and was bitten. The Crown Prince seized the opportunity, using a large rock to smash the head of the corpse that was pinning Bayam-il down. But it wasn't over. Bayam-il, bitten, had become a zombie. He roared like an animal and attacked. The Crown Prince quickly ran away, but there was no escape because the surviving soldier had locked them inside. He finished off Bayam-il with a slash to the neck. Escaping death by a hair's breadth, Li Cheng couldn't hide his fear as he went outside. The groans of the living dead echoed everywhere. He ran to the riverbank and saw Dongni engulfed in flames. Bayam-pal and his two underlings were hiding under the floorboards. Above them, a zombie was biting someone, fresh blood flowing through the gaps in the wooden planks, dripping onto his face. He was scared shitless, but he didn't dare cry out or even breathe heavily, thinking that lying still here would keep him safe. But life rarely goes as planned. One zombie that had fallen down discovered them. All three screamed in horror, simultaneously letting out animalistic roars. It quickly crawled inside, and the three of them scrambled, desperately trying to squeeze out of the cramped space. Another corpse crawled over, and both underlings were bitten before they could escape. Bayam-pal was lucky enough to get out, intending to jump over the wall to escape, but that side was also surrounded by a horde of zombies. He and his two men desperately ran towards the prison, where Bai was being held. Hurriedly opening the door to escape inside, the corpses were already closing in. One of the underlings was bitten while locking the door. The cowardly Bayam-pal hid behind Bai. She suppressed her fear and quickly grabbed the sword from the floor. The zombie underling lunged forward, only to have its neck pierced by the sword and fall to the ground. Now, only the two of them were in the room, temporarily safe. Outside, zombies were everywhere. In another cell, two prisoners were shackled together, one of whom had already been infected. The other screamed in terror. Watching this scene, it's hard to say whether one should feel pity or find it amusing. Outside, a child about to be bitten was saved by a precise spear, piercing the zombie's head. Young Shin lifted the child over the wall and carried it to the shelter upstairs, out of reach of the corpses. A woman carrying a baby in a sling ran up, pursued by a pack of monsters. Young Shin tried to save the child after the mother had been bitten, eventually falling victim to the ravenous zombie mob. He was heartbroken and helpless as he witnessed the scene, amidst the chaos everywhere. The officials trampled each other trying to escape, followed by an ever-growing horde of zombies. On the riverbank, the fishermen happily wanted to show off their catch to their friend running towards them. They had no idea that the brother who had fought alongside them for years was leading them to their deaths. In the small village, children were playing happily when suddenly one boy pinned his friend down and bit him. Gradually, the zombie horde flooded into the village. What could be more terrifying than seeing loved ones slaughtering each other? The father killed by his own dutiful son who had once cared for him, or the mother who personally took the life of her young daughter, the innocent child not understanding what was happening. That person was the only one she could rely on. Old, young, big, small, healthy, or sick, commoners or officials, corpses of all shapes, sizes, and social statuses were everywhere. The screenwriter painted a tragic, death-filled, and bloody picture. Li Chang stared in shock at the boat carrying a zombie on the river. It was screaming while fresh blood poured continuously from its mouth. On the other side of the river, hordes of zombies were crowding and pushing each other as they ran onto the bridge, heading for their prey. The Crown Prince took off running, but their speed was rapid, the distance quickly closing. Fortunately, Mu Young arrived in time and fired arrows in support. By the time they reached the small bridge, most of them had fallen. The Crown Prince mounted a horse, thinking he had escaped, until a corpse lunged and bit the horse's thigh. The horse, in agony, fell, throwing both riders. The corpse kept attacking, and Mu Young struggled to fight it off even as the sword pierced through its body. Li Chang rescued Mu Young, explaining that they had to aim for the head to kill them. The corpses under the bridge didn't give up, gradually crawling up and continuing the slaughter. The two men, along with a group of fleeing civilians, quickly headed towards a nearby camp. The crowd grew larger and larger, gathering outside the gate because they couldn't get inside. The leader and his cowardly soldiers had locked the doors to save their own skins, ignoring the pleas and screams from outside. Li Chang climbed over the wall to assess the situation. Following him, several strong young men also started to climb. The wall, built of starwood, couldn't withstand the weight of so many people. It began to tilt and could collapse at any moment. Those inside started to panic. The leader gave the order, and an arrow was fired, causing Li Chang to fall to the ground. Despite Mu Young's warnings, they didn't believe he was the Crown Prince and continued to oppress the people. Driven by the desire to live, the entire crowd surged towards the wall. The soldiers used spears to push them away, treating them like insects. People climbed up, only to fall back down. Not stopping there, they fired warning shots in unison. This scum was no different from the zombie monsters outside, pushing the people straight into death. The horde of zombies quickly rushed forward, and the crowd fled in panic. Those who weren't quick enough were bitten and torn apart. The Crown Prince and Mu Young jumped into a large lake, and the monsters, following their momentum, also fell in. They struggled and gradually sank to the bottom. The two quickly swam to a patch of land in the middle of the lake. They would wait safely there until sunrise. At this point, they believed what Xiao Bai had said was true. The scene shifted to the royal palace. The king's corpse was devouring a female slave who died with her eyes wide open. He was chained by the neck like an animal. Cho Hak-ju showed the queen this scene, intending to teach her that this was the fate of a king without power. Looking down at her feet, which were stained with blood, it's unclear what the queen was thinking. Meanwhile, Young Shin's shelter was attracting more and more zombies. Watching them groaning and shuffling around below, the people above didn't dare breathe loudly. The prison was no exception. Bam Pal trembled, huddling behind Xiao Bai. The couple shackled in the next room continued to writhe. The sun began to rise, and the terrified corpses quickly sought shelter, creeping into dark places. At the royal palace, court ladies were carefully applying powder to the king's wrinkled corpse. Some areas were even missing chunks of flesh. The queen returned with her feet stained with blood. The court ladies took the stained clothing away to destroy it, ensuring that no one would know what had happened. The eaten corpse would be thrown into the lake in the back garden, as usual. After the terrifying night, everywhere was in ruins, and bodies could be seen everywhere. The survivors gathered together. How is that bastard still alive? He not only didn't admit his own guilt, but also blamed Young Shin, even though he had warned about the situation beforehand. Xiao Bai explained everything to everyone and said that they needed to behead or burn the corpses to destroy them. However, the mother of an official disagreed. She wouldn't allow anyone to touch her son's corpse. Other nobles felt the same way. They believed that the corpses of commoners and nobles should be handled differently. At this moment, Li Chang appeared and punched the cowardly man in the face. Then, he drew his sword and pointed it at him for blocking the gate of the barracks last night, causing so many deaths, he realized the bitter truth that the ruling class was now too cowardly, abandoning the people. Li Chang's identity was revealed, and everyone knelt before the crown prince of the country. Taking advantage of the 3 days, he ordered all the corpses to be burned and for the people to be quarantined and evacuated across the river before dark, before the corpses rose again. Large plumes of smoke gradually rose. In another development in Hanyang, head scholar Kim Sun secretly met with a loyal minister to discuss the rumor of the discovery of a corpse in the king's palace. The investigation hit a snag due to their inability to act freely. They didn't have many allies and had to be wary of Cho Hak-ju's authority as well as the queen's. Therefore, Kim Sun decided to write a letter seeking the help of Lord An Hyun, a former general who had greatly contributed to Joseon's victory over the Japanese forces 3 years prior and was greatly admired by the people. He had resigned from his post and returned to his hometown of Sangju to observe mourning rites for his mother. However, the letter was intercepted by Cho Hak-ju's men. He dismissed it, believing An Hyun wouldn't be able to stand against him for one reason or another. Back in Dongnae, Bayam Pal was in his quarters, feeling incredibly anxious. Seo Bai was brought before him, and she assumed she was being arrested for punishment. But unexpectedly, Bayam Pal said he wanted to keep her by his side until his hair turned white, because she had saved his life. Wasn't this a confession of love? But Seo Bai didn't understand and thought he simply needed a physician by his side to treat his ailments. He eagerly offered his arm for her to take his pulse, and he was stunned silent when she diagnosed him with gonorrhea. Afterward, Mu Young arrived to take Seo Bai away. Back at the Julhian infirmary, she was heartbroken as she recalled that horrifying night. The patients she considered family, her fellow physician, and her teacher had all turned into monsters. Li Chang was reading medical records in his hand and was slowly understanding the entire secret behind the curtain. The treatment process and information about the resurrection plant were meticulously recorded. The truth was that the king was dead, and there was a conspiracy to turn him into a living corpse to seize the throne for the Heewon-cho family. Meanwhile, Mu Young was incredibly anxious because he couldn't find Bayam Il's head. If that head fell into Cho Hak-ju's hands, he would flay alive whoever killed his only son. The crown prince recalled his father's words from when he was a child and resolved to confront Cho Hak-ju. The notebook and Seo Bai's confirmation were evidence against him. He decided that, at daybreak, he would seek out Lord An Hyun for help. On Bayam Pal's side, he was incited by a cowardly nobleman who argued that there weren't enough ships to save all the people. Instead, they and the other nobles should get on one of the rare ships and flee. The plan was quickly put into action. The ship carrying them left the dock, abandoning all the people who were wailing and pleading in desperation. They were incredibly happy, thinking they were safe, unaware that death awaited them ahead. A noblewoman secretly went down to the ship's hold, where there was a large chest. What did it contain? Upon his return, the crown prince flew into a rage upon seeing the commoners once again abandoned by the corrupt officials. They hadn't even cleared away the corpses, and the barracks that could have provided shelter had been dismantled to repair ships. At Seo Bai's suggestion, the crown prince led everyone to the Jurun infirmary. Young Shin stated that the corpses that were previously unable to get out would also be unable to get in. The elderly and the sick were placed on carts. Everyone was horrified to see corpses everywhere along the way. In any dark place, there was their presence. The sun had set, and night was gradually falling. The group tried to run as fast as they could towards the front. Li Chang and Mu Young helped with the 2 carts at the rear. Seeing that everyone had reached a safe place, Young Shin asked to return immediately. The cart in front was stuck and unable to move, while the corpses had begun to stir. Ignoring Mu Young's urging to flee, the crown prince was determined to stay. I am different from them, I am different from the people who abandoned them, and I am different from the Heewon-cho clan. The 3 of them worked together and succeeded. They got everyone onto the cart and moved forward. The bloodthirsty monsters pursued behind them, growing in number, pouring out from all directions. In front of them were 2 corpses that had just rolled down from the cliff. Taking the rifle from a soldier who had been devoured, in a precarious situation, Young Shin displayed his skillful marksmanship, shattering the heads of the closest corpses. The ammunition was exhausted, and a zombie clung to the crown prince's back. Mu Young swung his sword, slashing across its neck, accurately killing it. On the other side, Xiao Bai was waiting to guide them, and the door closed as soon as they arrived. Everyone quickly worked together to block the door. Everything happened extremely quickly. If they had been just a moment slower, they would all have perished. Following the Crown Prince's orders, the elderly and children were led by Xiao Bai to hide in the storage room. All those still capable of fighting remained on guard. Meanwhile, on that ship, the nobles were leisurely enjoying themselves, waiting for the day they would dock. But life is not always as one expects. Below deck, the lady was trembling, feeling pity and sorrow before the chest she had secretly brought on board. Inside, the corpse of her son was incessantly moving, demanding to be released. The lady, along with the curious nobles, investigated the strange noise, and a monster burst out, greeting them. This was followed by terrifying screams coming from the ship. This was their retribution. Back at Julhian, the zombies surrounded the outside. They reached their bloody hands through the cracks in the door. All night, everyone remained vigilant, holding their weapons tightly, no one daring to doze off even for a moment. Sunrise marked the passing of temporary danger. After the events that had transpired, Li Chang sat alone in his room, deep in thought. Upon exiting, he was met by all the commoners who were waiting. Everyone was extremely grateful to the Crown Prince for saving their lives. Without rest, Li Chang continued to give instructions and constantly thought about how to lead everyone through this tragedy. Young Xin smiled and played with the children, while Xiao Bai treated the injured. Looking at the meager amount of food they had managed to find, the Crown Prince understood more about the famine of the people even before the outbreak. They even ate insects to survive. While chatting with Mu Young, a shuttlecock flew from somewhere and hit the Crown Prince. Mu Young sternly called them over, and the four children were frightened, thinking they would be punished. Young Xin, who was assembling a rifle nearby, sighed in frustration. He was too accustomed to the aristocratic class. Unexpectedly, Li Chang distributed his remaining jerky to the children and all the commoners. Mu Young was reluctant but had to obey the order. At the mention of meat, everyone quickly gathered around. They were extremely curious because they had never seen anything like it before and hurriedly took it away to cook. The tiny pieces of dried meat expanded greatly, astonishing everyone. Knowing about the plan to go to Sangju to find Magistrate and Haiyan as an ally, Young Xin offered to lead the way since it was his hometown. After everything, his wife had come to understand that the man before her was completely different from the nobles out there. Mu Young questioned Young Xin's true identity after witnessing his proficient marksmanship, even better than the soldiers. Young Xin retorted that it was just a skill he had learned while in the military. Suddenly, the sound of a door being broken down rang out, and everyone was frightened and on alert. The royal army had arrived and surrounded the infirmary. Under the thick fog, the commander announced that the Crown Prince was a traitor. The people thought there was a mistake, and Mu Young offered to go out and meet them in place of the Crown Prince. At the same time, in Hanyang, in the middle of a room lay the corpse of a soldier who had died from a sword stab, fresh blood flowing down into a pool on the floor. Zhou Hakju's eyes were red with fury at the sight of Bayam Il's head contained in a box. His hands were stained with the blood of that soldier. He had raged so violently that he had killed the messenger. He vowed that he would make the Crown Prince pay with his life in the most brutal way possible for killing his son. The scene cut back to Jijinhian Infirmary, where a soldier climbed the wall to survey the situation outside and was unexpectedly shot down by an arrow. Following that, the royal army began to attack. Even though they were only after the Crown Prince, they still indiscriminately slaughtered the people taking refuge here. Arrows rained down, and Mu Young pushed the Crown Prince to the ground to avoid an arrow. Li Chang watched in agony as innocent lives were being taken away. He was dazed, unable to get up, and had to be dragged away by Mu Young. The people who had been happy just moments ago to have escaped the horde of zombies were now dying because of him. One by one, people fell, accompanied by pitiful screams. Young Xin suggested that the Crown Prince needed to go out and save everyone from death. Seeing the fearful faces all placing their hopes on him, Li Chang gradually regained his composure. Noticing that it had become quiet inside, the soldiers broke down the door and entered. The inside was filled with corpses lying scattered everywhere, the thick fog obscuring visibility. Suddenly, a bullet came from nowhere and accurately sent one of them to his grave. Realizing that the enemy had firearms, they increased their vigilance. Another one fell victim to a bullet. Seeing that the situation was unfavorable, Army Commander Li Du-jin ordered the musket squad to advance. They used whistles to signal, relying on the direction of the gunfire to pinpoint the enemy's location. In the fog, a shadowy figure quietly slit the throat of a soldier from behind without making a sound. He died on the spot without a cry. Running to the door to scout out the movements, Mu Young shot an arrow to distract the soldiers outside, while Li Chang charged out to fight them. Noticing the signal whistle, Li Du-jin led his subordinates toward the entrance. The soldiers were dead when they arrived, and at the same time, they heard a whistle coming from another direction. They immediately led the troops to pursue. Inside, Yang Xin, hiding behind a wall, was aiming when he was spotted by one from behind. He shot the enemy dead, but the gun was knocked out of his hand by another. Using a small dagger as a weapon, he waited for the remaining two soldiers to approach. Xiao Bai, from behind, suddenly charged out with a stick and struck one on the head. Instantly, Yang Xin jumped out, slashed the other one to death, and quickly threw the dagger to finish off the remaining soldier who was still dazed. Everything had been resolved cleanly. Yang Xin led the remaining survivors north, to where the plague hadn't yet spread. Before leaving, a heartbroken Xiao Bai removed an arrow from the dead girl's body and placed her carefully inside the house for a proper burial. In the forest, the Crown Prince and Mu Young were being pursued relentlessly. An arrow whizzed past, hitting a tree trunk. The thick fog became their advantage, making it easier for them to secretly kill the soldiers and impersonate them. The soldiers panicked, running towards the whistles blaring from all directions. The two men successfully diverted the troops and escaped. They reunited with Xiao Bai and Yang Xin. Commander Li Du-jin lost track of his prey, but he wasn't in a hurry to chase after them because he had just received an unsigned note delivering information. He already knew the Crown Prince's plan to go to Sangju. In Hanyang, signal fires were lit, signaling the coming of war. Everyone feared a Japanese invasion like the one 3 years prior. Chief Scholar Kim Sun seized the opportunity to request an audience with the king, in order to uncover the secrets hidden within the palace. Along with 3 others, he approached the royal chamber. Surprisingly, Zhou Hakju took the initiative to lead them inside this time. The queen was furious but couldn't stop them, because the servants completely obeyed her father's orders. The sun gradually set. 2 trembling maids drew the bamboo curtains aside. Zhou Hakju announced that the signal fires were lit to indicate that the plague had spread. The disease caused people to sleep during the day and crave flesh and blood at night. Zhou Hakju asserted that the king was only ill and would soon recover. The doors closing marked the moment that the iron chains gradually tightened. Before them was the king's blood-smeared face with stark white eyes. Before the 4 men could even recover from the horrifying sight before them, Zhou Hakju accused the scholars and the crown prince of treason, with evidence in hand. He ordered the chief scholar beheaded and the crown prince hunted down and killed. Soldiers seized Kim Sun and his entire lineage for interrogation. Meanwhile, the queen was furious to learn that Zhou Hakju had planned everything in advance but didn't discuss it with her until she saw her brother's head with her own eyes. She was speechless, unable to say a word. Zhou Hakju warned that no one could stop him, not even the queen. He reminded her that her position and power were granted by him. The only thing she needed to do was bear a son. The ship carrying the nobles was soaked in blood and corpses after a mother secretly brought her son's body aboard. As night fell, the crown prince's group stopped to rest by the riverbank. Xiao Bai listlessly held the hair tie of the dead child. She carefully washed the bloodstains from the crimson ribbon, as a way to comfort the girl's spirit in heaven. Perhaps, up there, she would live a better life. Xiao Bai went to the riverbank to fetch a water jug for the crown prince. He was sitting silently, staring at the campfire, a piece of dried meat untouched beside him. Inside, he was a mess of conflicting emotions, pity for the innocent people who had fallen, and self-reproach. If only I had intervened sooner, perhaps I could have saved them. Xiao Bai comforted him, saying it wasn't his fault and urging him to eat so he'd have the strength to continue the long journey ahead. When the two were lost in thought, Xiao Bai remarked how different he was from the nobles who had abandoned them. She said she would go find herbs to treat the wound, and only then did Li Chang notice the injury on his hand. With the light of a small torch as her only illumination, Xiao Bai ventured alone into the desolate forest to find medicine. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince and Mu Yang spoke about young Xin, who still hadn't returned. With his masterful marksmanship, even surpassing the most elite troops of the Royal Guard, Xiao Bai had become suspicious and discovered that both young Xin's name and his identification tag were fake. Only members of the Chako squad, an elite group of soldiers specializing in tiger hunting, possessed such skills. Due to the dangerous nature of their work, their members were chosen based on ability, regardless of status or class. They were dangerous and capable of doing anything to survive. At that moment, young Xin returned, having scouted the road and visited nearby villages. The plague had spread, but people were still terrified because rumors had spread everywhere. Many had fled. After giving his report, he resumed his watch. Back in the forest where Xiao Bai was searching for herbs, a feeling of unease washed over her. She felt like she was being watched from behind. Suppressing her fear, she slowly grabbed her hoe and torch, preparing for the worst. The firelight illuminated the blood-covered face of the figure standing behind her. Xiao Bai screamed in terror. The scream echoed in the distance, startling those by the riverbank to their feet. The three of them hurriedly grabbed their weapons and rushed towards her. Xiao Bai returned, warning that there were the undead in the forest, and hiding behind the Crown Prince. The group gripped their weapons tightly, on high alert. But what kind of monster would run and sob while begging for water? It turned out to be the foolish Bam Pal, with his disheveled hair and bloodied face. Before they could rejoice at finding a survivor in this dire situation, the Crown Prince mercilessly kicked Bam Pal, sending him sprawling, wanting nothing more than to stomp his face. He was furious at Bam Pal's cowardice and that of the other nobles, which had caused so many people to fall and the plague to spread even faster. Mu Yang stopped him, arguing that Bam Pal wasn't worth killing, and simultaneously questioned him about what had happened. The distraught Bam Pal recounted the events. All the nobles on the ship had been infected because a dead body had been secretly brought aboard. Blessed by his ancestors, he had jumped into the water and was the only survivor. Now, the ship full of monsters was heading towards and would soon reach Sangju. They were deeply worried because rumors of the plague only extended to fortresses near Dongmei, and Sangju would fall without preparation. Next, the plague would quickly spread to the capital Hanyang and across the entire country. The Crown Prince's group quickly proceeded to Sangju to warn everyone. They set off that very night, heedless of the danger. They had to stop it before things got too late. This time, they had a new companion, the dim-witted Bam Pal. They had no idea if he'd amount to anything. Meanwhile, the monster ship was gradually docking. The scene on board was chaotic, with blood everywhere. The corpse of a nobleman was engaged in a yelling contest with a pig, seeing which one could shout louder. The scene then cuts to morning in Sangju, the second largest province in the country, after the capital, Hanin. Soldiers stood guard meticulously on the city walls, protecting the peaceful scene behind them. On the bustling streets, people bustled about. A shaman was in high spirits, dancing on the floor of an old house. Surrounding her were people praying, hoping to ward off the epidemic. The rumors spread far and wide, becoming richer stories with each retelling. They heard that a headless ghost appeared at night. While they were busy gossiping, the shaman threw salt at them, startling them and causing them to pray and plead incessantly. On the hilltop, Lord Enhyan, dressed in white mourning clothes, sat in his small tent next to his mother's grave, as usual. He had resigned from his post 3 years ago to return home and mourn his mother. His subordinate approached, bringing news that there were rumors of an epidemic in Dongni. The news had spread to Zhongsang, which surrounded Sangju. Hearing this, Enhyan paused his cleaning of the memorial bowl. Unlike others who doubted the rumors, his expression turned serious. He immediately stood up and ordered his subordinate to prepare for him to descend the mountain. Back on the street, a child was using cinnabar to draw talismans. Because they believed the talismans would ward off the epidemic, many people crowded around to buy them, regardless of whether they were effective or not. Unscrupulous merchants were taking advantage of the people's anxiety to get rich. One young man, not having enough money, was quickly driven away. When Lord Enhyan arrived, The crowd immediately fell silent and bowed to him. Not just them, but all the people respectfully acknowledged this benevolent official. He was a great hero in the war to drive out the Japanese. Hearing the news of a strange ship docking, he immediately went to see it for himself. He and his subordinate boarded the ship and went inside. Noticing a suspicious-looking chest in the corner, his subordinate immediately drew his sword defensively and cautiously approached. When opened, the chest was empty but stained red with blood. On the walls of the chest were scratch marks, as if it had once held a wild beast inside, struggling to escape, and Hyan wondered where the dead people had gone. At this time, the Crown Prince's party arrived in the Sangju area. They passed through a small village deep in the forest, where farmers gathered to cultivate fields. Smoke billowed from the thatched houses, and the rich smell of roasting meat wafted in the air. Entering the village, they encountered a small feast. The Crown Prince was surprised and suspicious as to why these poor people had rice and pork to eat so lavishly, despite the famine. Before the Crown Prince's question, everyone avoided eye contact. An old man, who seemed to be the village elder, stepped forward. He said that this was a reward because they had helped out at a nobleman's banquet. Then, Bayam Pal saw a woman happily trying on a piece of fine cloth. Caught red-handed, she was utterly panicked, hiding them behind her. All the goods from the ship were hidden in the small cabin. Simultaneously, the villagers knelt, begging for their lives. They had stolen all the goods to trade for food. The corpses on the ship were all buried. The burial site was a field of reeds taller than a person. When the Crown Prince's group was led there, dusk was falling. Abruptly, the four villagers stopped, refusing to go any further. They brandished weapons in their hands. They knew stealing from the royal court was punishable by beheading, and they thought that eliminating the Crown Prince's group would ensure no one reported them. Li Chang said the corpses could kill everyone and tried to ask where they were buried. At his feet, as the sun set, the ground began to shake, accompanied by roaring sounds. A corpse nearby clawed its way out and lunged to attack a villager. Despite desperately stabbing a sickle into its back, drawing blood, it didn't stop. Next, it charged towards the Crown Prince, only to be sent to the afterlife by Mu Yang with a single sword strike to the neck. The bitten villager also began to turn. Li Chang quickly struck him down before others could react. Before everyone could recover, the remaining corpses had awakened and launched their attack. The villagers, inexperienced in combat, were quickly bitten and killed. Li Chang swung his sword with precise strikes, while Yang Xin shot each of the monsters' head apart. Before they could finish dealing with this group, another wave of monsters charged forward like a tide. Bayam Pal, screaming, grabbed a headless corpse as a shield. A corpse charged like a missile, and Siobai grabbed a sickle, frantically hacking at its head. However, they were too many. At the critical moment, a volley of arrows rained down, targeting the monsters and setting the grass ablaze, illuminating the entire area. The white-clad soldiers of Lord and Hyan had arrived just in time. He had followed the cart tracks along the riverbank to find them. They were like professional assassins, accurately targeting the heads of the infected and attacking with well-coordinated maneuvers. The battle quickly turned. The Crown Prince and Lord An recognized each other. The scene shifted to the royal palace, back when Lord An was still in office. The young Crown Prince, who was very young, was huddled in a cave. He was crying, missing his mother and fearing he would be killed because of the political pressure to depose him. And Hyan embraced the boy, comforted him, and led him to the main hall. Seeing his father come out, the young prince tried to run away in fear. And Hyan said that no one could save the Crown Prince except himself. He had to live and fight for justice. Returning to the field, he and his subordinates respectfully knelt, declaring the Crown Prince to be the future king of the nation. It had been a long time since Li Chang had seen his mentor, and Hyan led them to his residence in Zhong, carrying the king's medical records in his hand. All the while, the Crown Prince continued to tell him everything that happened. Seeing Li Chang's obvious urgency, and Hyan asked how many nights he hadn't slept. He sternly taught that as a Crown Prince, he couldn't act like a street thug. He must always be proper and confident. He told him to rest easy tonight. At the same time, outside in the courtyard, Siobai asked Mu Yang about Lord and Hyan. She found it strange that both Hyan and his followers showed no surprise or fear in the face of the infected. They didn't hesitate and even knew exactly how to kill them and burn the bodies immediately after, as if they already knew perfectly well what was going on. The Crown Prince returned and told Mu Young that Enhyan was unsure about the alliance. Along with his inaction in saving the young scholars when they were arrested and punished, Mu Young suspects that Minister and might be in league with Chief State Councilor Zhou Hakju. However, Li Chang immediately dismisses the suspicion. He trusts his teacher and believes that no one would dare look down on him. Meanwhile, in Hanyang, inside a prison cell, an inmate is devouring meat as if he's starving to death, causing his cellmate to look at him with envy. While the cellmate is grumbling, he suddenly freezes. More horrifically, he starts convulsing and then awakens like a beast, lunging at and killing his fellow prisoner. Ignoring the screams, Zhou Hakju and his subordinates outside watch intently. The prisoner who was bitten is left covered in a viscous mess of blood and flesh, and then swiftly reanimates in the form of a monster. This is an experiment intended to prove that when a healthy person consumes the flesh of someone infected, the disease will spread uncontrollably. It must be stopped before it reaches the north. In Zhongsang, young Xin wakes up very early and secretly leaves the residence. In the distance, Enhyan witnesses everything. As he passes the memorial commemorating the miraculous victory 3 years prior, where Enhyan had annihilated 30,000 Japanese soldiers and 500 troops, young Xin spits on it with contempt. Young Xin's identity is gradually revealed as he arrives at ruins that were once a mission village, his hometown. He left the village long ago to join the military, abandoning his family and the villagers to starvation. Now, they are dead and buried neatly nearby. It seems that young Xin is planning to avenge his family. He suddenly notices an incense bowl still smoking, as if someone still comes here regularly to pay respects. The scene shifts to the north gate of Sangju. The luggage on the transport has been brought back for investigation. News that the royal guards are coming to arrest the crown prince is also spreading. The army marches in long columns, with no end in sight. Bayam Pal persuades Xiao Bai to flee with him, because anyone associated with the crown prince will be killed. Xiao Bai is astonished, calling him a coward. She refuses and decides to stay. In Hanyang, several poor, homeless, pregnant widows are being gathered together, provided with ample food and lodging. They happily enjoy a lavish feast. Among them is Enju Zhang's wife, whom he sent here while he was away. People speculate about the identity of the mysterious benefactor who has generously helped them. Early morning at the royal palace where the throne remains vacant, the queen, wearing a vibrant red phoenix robe, walks step by step to the highest position. She, along with the chief state councilor, issues a decree to the court officials and military commanders, proclaiming that due to the king's illness and the difficult circumstances of the people, coupled with the crown prince's act of rebellion, the queen will assume the regency. She orders the royal guards to isolate Zhongsang, blockading all roads leading out of the province. Anyone attempting to leave will be killed. Zhou Hakju plots for the crown prince to die within the plague-stricken region. At a pavilion by the lake in the secret garden, the queen is concerned that the blockade will completely destroy Zhongsang, a fertile land that has always contributed much to the court. Zhou Hakju replies that power lies not only in wealth, but also in the fact that no one dares utter a word about how many corpses he has thrown into the lake. At the same time, he warns the queen not to abuse her power, reminding her that her power was granted to her by him, and he can take it away at any time. He will personally travel to Zhongsang and do everything in his power to kill the crown prince with his own hands. In Zhongsang, the crowds of people are pressing governor and to hand over the crown prince in order to save themselves. Inside the room, Li Chang calmly polishes his sword, while Mu Young anxiously reminds him not to trust anyone and to leave immediately. At that moment, the royal troops arrived. They believed that Enhyan had helped capture the crown prince. Mu Young had his sword ready for battle at any moment. Unexpectedly, before the soldiers could even charge, Enhyan clearly declared that all those who followed Zhou Hakju were rebels. The royal guards, those who were supposed to serve the country and the king, had come to suppress the crown prince, destroying the core values of the nation. As he finished speaking, archers concealed around the perimeter emerged and simultaneously raised their bows and arrows towards the soldiers. The entire group was quickly annihilated. The Crown Prince recalled his conversation with an Hyan from the night before. He knew in advance that the royal guards would come here, meaning that they were well aware of his every move. Among those who followed him, there was certainly a traitor, constantly reporting his situation to the enemy. And Hyan advised him to rest assured and prepare for the confrontation, while also keeping the conversation a secret to guard against spies. Back in the present, the commander was still gasping for breath, cursing that no one would survive. Li Chang stepped forward and sent him to his maker with a decisive strike of his sword. Immediately after, a subordinate quickly arrived with news. Everyone rushed towards the city walls. A stream of refugees from the southern regions was fleeing to this place, their homeland ravaged by an epidemic. The frantic crowd demanded entry into the city. The epidemic could arrive here in 2 days, or even tonight. The Crown Prince ordered that all the people be allowed inside for shelter. However, the magistrate disagreed, citing that the number of people was too large and could continue to grow. The stockpiled food would not be enough for everyone, easily leading to looting and chaos. He argued that the people outside had to be sacrificed for the common good, so that those inside the city could live. Li Chang drew his sword and held it to the magistrate's throat, declaring, in his capacity as Crown Prince, that he was dismissing this incompetent and cowardly man. Governor and Hyan also supported him. The magistrate could only mutter that everyone would regret it, then angrily departed. However, what he said was not without reason. The issue of food was crucial, and the city could not accommodate everyone. To protect all the people, it was necessary to keep the entire Sangju province safe from the epidemic. A plan had to be devised to fight against the living dead. The city gates were opened, and the people joyously poured in. With the understanding of the monsters, they were not active during the day, and were afraid of fire and water. The Crown Prince ordered the defense to be concentrated on the south side, which was surrounded by rivers and swamps. On his command, the plan was quickly implemented. Soldiers chopped bamboo, arranging them neatly into bundles for transport. This was a war for survival, requiring the unity of all. The people did not stand idly by. The able-bodied men in the city crafted arrows and weapons to fight. An old man was tightening a bowstring, showing that even the elderly were not resting. Everyone participated in tasks appropriate to their abilities. Boxes of crude weapons were distributed to everyone. Even the nobles, accustomed to living in luxury, were not exempt. Despite their discontent, they could not disobey the Crown Prince's order. In the forge, the blacksmiths diligently hammered iron. Doors were also dismantled. Anything that could be used was brought to the defense lines. 2 paths remained leading into Sangju. The first was the Unpo Swamp, surrounded by rivers and water with only one road connecting the 2 regions. The second defensive location was a stone bridge spanning the Bingnok stream. Each person had a task. Some transported supplies, others dug trenches to create traps. On the river, they built rafts of wood. Everyone was busy with their own work. Everything needed to be done before sunset and the awakening of the undead. At the palace, the queen received news that someone was born today. She ordered that she only be informed if it was a son. At the same time, at the residence where pregnant widows lived, a woman was in labor. Everyone outside waited anxiously until the cry of a newborn echoed through the air. Before their joy could take hold, the crying stopped abruptly. What was wrong? People worriedly inquired, only to be told that both mother and child were healthy. Upon hearing it was a girl, with the exception of Mu Young's wife, the other expectant mothers scoffed at the uselessness of daughters. The ingrained preference for sons was clear in this era. It wasn't just present in the royal family and aristocracy, but deeply rooted in the minds of the common people. Inside the room, blood was splattered everywhere. A servant was mopping up the bloodstains on the floor. Strangely, the amount of blood seemed excessive for a normal childbirth. Meanwhile, at the palace, maids were cleaning the queen's chambers. One of them accidentally spilled water. They quickly cleaned it up and breathed a sigh of relief when they saw the precious robe hadn't been stained. They remembered that even a tiny speck of blood had been enough to have the queen's robe burned immediately. After finishing the cleanup, the two quickly left, startled to find the queen standing outside the door the entire time. That evening, the maid who had cleaned up that morning prepared water for the queen's bath. She innocently asked the head maid why she had been given such a prestigious task. While helping the queen undress, she was shocked to see a pillow strapped to the queen's belly. It turned out she wasn't pregnant at all. Accidentally learning about the destroyed garments cost the young maid her life. In Sangju, Siobai was busy washing herbs. Bayam Pal happily showed off a basket overflowing with what he had gathered, proud of contributing to grass. But when he emptied the basket, Siobai could only sigh. How foolish. Everything he picked was just useless weeds. In the end, Siobai had to gather the herbs herself, with the whining shadow of Bayam Pal constantly complaining behind her. When he learned that Siobai was looking for herbs to treat the crown prince's wounds, Bayam Pal became jealous. Suddenly, they discovered a roped-off area. A human figure, looking like a corpse, hung from a tree. Bayam Pal said this was the Frozen Valley, a dangerous place forbidden to enter because it was said to be haunted by ghosts. Hearing this, Siobai quickly proceeded inside, because this was where the resurrection plant grew, the plant that could turn people into the undead and caused all of this. The two made their way along the cliff face and arrived at the spot. The valley was shrouded in mist, the air as cold as winter. Before them was a small lake, separated by a rope tied with tattered strips of fabric. Small bells hung on the rope, jingling with the movement of the cord. Despite Bayam Pal's constant warnings, Siobai waded through the lake to go inside. The cowardly Bayam Pal didn't dare stay behind, and waded in too, constantly complaining about the cold. Inside was a cave filled with resurrection plants. Those small, purple flowers had such a terrifying purpose. She quickly rummaged through it. Bayam Pal discovered everyday items inside the cave. That meant someone was living here, right in this desolate, frigid place. There were also iron chains and shackles, as if something had been imprisoned. At the same time, a shadow darted past like the wind, causing the dividing rope to fall. Over by the swamp, Yongxin was instructing the soldiers on how to shoot with the utmost accuracy, to the awe of everyone. And Hyan also praised him and was informed by a subordinate that he belonged to the Sahataka Hall tiger hunting team from Sumang village. Upon hearing this, he became pensive. But when the crown prince inquired, he replied that he didn't know anything about him. Was there a truth being concealed? Wasn't Hyan someone the crown prince should be wary of? An order was issued. Everyone needed to thoroughly inspect everything before sunset and not to panic and leave their positions, no matter what happened. 2 large carts were blocking the entrance, loaded with securely fastened barrels of oil. Rafts had also left the shore and were anchored in the distance. Large snare pits were set up on the hills and covered with camouflage netting. Everything was meticulously prepared. Everyone was on high alert, awaiting the arrival of the undead army. Their eyes were fixed on the distant darkness. A scouting party had been dispatched but hadn't returned. Meanwhile, Hak-ju had arrived at the northern gate of Sangju, carrying a coffin with a corpse inside that was relentlessly pounding to get out. What was he plotting? On the other side, everyone was hastily eating, filled with worry and unease. This might be their last meal. Suddenly, there was a noise from afar. A soldier's patrol horse returned with a severed forearm still clutching the reins, bloodstains fresh on its back. The blood wasn't dry, meaning the event had just occurred, and the undead would arrive soon. And Hyan fired a flaming arrow with pinpoint accuracy into one of the oil barrels. 2 large bonfires erupted, illuminating the path. This was the signal. Large fires were gradually lit at the second line of defense as well. It was almost dawn. Everyone took their positions, praying for the sun to rise quickly. A strange thing happened. As the night deepened and passed, not a single undead appeared. It seemed like a lucky day for Sangju. Everyone was overjoyed, preparing to rest after a weary day and night. The fires were extinguished. However, Hak-ju, observing from a distance, smirked, knowing that the real nightmare was just beginning. In the sky, birds flew off in panic, heralding something terrible. In the frozen valley, Siobai and Bayam Pal were now trapped by the infected. They realized that the undead were only afraid of heat, not sunlight. Winter had arrived, the temperature had dropped, allowing the infected to be active even in daylight. The ground rumbled, causing the lake to ripple. An earth-shattering roar echoed from afar. In the thick fog, the legion of undead charged forward like a tide. The real nightmare was only just beginning. Going back to the past, during the battle with the Japanese forces 3 years prior, royal physician Lee Seung-hui had presented Jo-Hak-jo with the resurrection plant, claiming that it could bring the dead back to life in the form of bloodthirsty, flesh-eating monsters. However, it would only work on corpses that hadn't begun to decompose and whose brains were still intact. Stepping out of the rest tent revealed the nighttime camp scene. The soldiers were despondent due to the incredibly unfavorable situation. The Japanese army was overwhelming, with a force of 30,000 soldiers. While they only had 500, they certainly had no chance of winning. In the courtyard, countless corpses lay motionless. These were the soldiers who had fallen in battle, and Hyan and his subordinates were collecting their name tags, keeping them as a form of remembrance. War was always like this. It took the lives of so many people, leaving behind grief and loss. Echoing through the night were cries like a deathly melody from the flock of crows. Back in the present, in the dense fog, a horde of the undead surged forward like a tide, with no end in sight. Blood-soaked bodies gradually emerged into the light, and they charged like arrows, heading straight for their prey. There was no time to be afraid. Everyone quickly moved into position, ready to confront them. However, the previous night's defense had worn down their defenses. The fires had been extinguished, and the wet wood couldn't be lit. Without the heat to deter them, they charged in like a storm. One soldier, seeing the dire situation, jumped into the water, hoping to climb onto the nearest raft to escape. However, they were too fast. Both the man and the raft were swept away. On this side, a rain of arrows was fired, but it couldn't stop the monster's advance. Everyone worked together to push the raft away from the dock. The last ones were bitten. Young Shin quickly chopped off the remaining part of the raft to escape. The horde of the undead on the shore fell into the trap and were impaled by the stakes. However, the trap couldn't hold them for long. The pit was quickly filled with corpses. Cannons were brought in. Row after row of corpses fell and then rose again. Behind them, they continued to swarm forward, filling the cannon holes. The crude line of defense quickly crumbled. People used their weapons and their own strength to stop them. Those who were unlucky enough to be bitten had to have their heads chopped off. Seeing the situation deteriorating, Commander Du ordered a retreat. They quickly ran towards Sangjun Fortress. Behind them, the defensive wall completely collapsed. On the river, Young Shin's group thought they were safe, but they suddenly discovered that one man had been bitten. Despite his pleas, they had to kill him to save everyone else's lives. They quickly rowed the raft towards Sangjun. The second defensive location had also completely fallen. The group raced against death toward the fortress wall, where the soldiers had prepared rope ladders. The undead were hot on their heels. Countless people who couldn't climb in time were bitten. Crown Prince and his team arrived and realized they were surrounded, and Hyan suggested using a nearby secret passage. On the way, they met Young Shin's group, who had also just arrived. However, the tunnel gate was locked. They used the wooden planks on either side to create a defensive barrier. While Hyan's men fought the infected, Mu Young managed to open the gate. However, the doorframe was too old and got stuck, and they couldn't close it. One man in the group, already bitten, sacrificed himself by wrapping the chain around himself and plunging his sword into his body to block the gate, clearing the path to life for everyone. Ignoring the horde of corpses fighting to bite him, he didn't utter a word of pain, his resolute eyes urging everyone to leave. Young Shin, unsure of what he was thinking, helped him end his life, helping him escape the torment. Before that, he had only said to him, "I'm sorry." What does this apology even mean? How does it relate to the things of the past? Meanwhile, Seo Bai and Baeum Pal scramble out of the frozen valley to escape the awakened infected. It's usually the beautiful woman who saves the hero, but this is the opposite. Without Seo Bai, that foolish Baeum Pal would probably be long gone. He clumsily climbs the cliff face, constantly shouting, as the infected are held back at the lake's edge. Besides the warmer temperature, Seo Bai has also discovered that the infected are afraid of water, which is why they can't cross. Unable to return to Sangju, she decides to head to Mungyang CG, where they can find refuge because Baeum Pal is the only surviving descendant of He Woncho. Upon arriving, Jo-Hak-ju scolds Baeum Pal for not doing anything when the Crown Prince killed his son, only saving himself. The blood of He Won-cho saved his life. When he learns that Seo Bai is a student of Lee Seung-hui, Jo Hak-ju allows them both to stay. In Hanyang, people are using animal blood, desalinated salt, and doing everything they can to ward off evil, hoping to fight off the plague. Min Kai-rak, the head of the Royal Military Training Command, discovers the corpses of pregnant women discarded outside the city walls. There are also corpses of newborn baby girls, indicating that the perpetrator desires a son. They came from Aeseonji, the queen's private residence. With his upright nature, Min Kai-rak is determined to uncover the entire truth. In the sky, the signal rockets are a warning of deathly atmosphere. Inside a room, a chicken is hanging upside down, dripping blood into a censer before a shaman performing a ritual. She tells the queen that her plan has been noticed and that she needs the help of the chief state counselor. However, the queen wants to keep the matter of her child's birth a secret from her father. She is plotting her own scheme. At Sangju, the crown prince is facing the bloodthirsty infected outside, along with a food shortage. The remaining reserves are only enough to feed the people for about 5 days, even with rationing. One of Enhyeon's subordinates says that this plague is no longer the same as it was 3 years ago. It no longer spreads through bites. He believes that Jo Hak-ju is hiding something from them about the disease. He also thinks that this calamity is retribution for what they did during the war. However, Enhyeon shows no remorse for his actions. He thinks it was necessary to save the country 3 years ago. Mu-yong, after overhearing this, reports it to the crown prince and suggests leaving immediately. The crown prince denies it and accuses Mu-yong of working for Jo Hak-ju, since he's the only one who knows his every move. Mu-yong is suspected of being a spy and wanting to drive a wedge between the crown prince and Minister N. Mu-yong looks the crown prince in the eye and says that he left his hometown and his pregnant wife behind, sacrificing everything to follow the crown prince. So, who should be wary of should one be cautious of Mu-yong, or of the teacher, the uncle, the benevolent General Enhyeon? The conversation is interrupted by a large fire at the warehouse, which holds all the food for the refugees. Everyone quickly works together to put out the fire, but it's too late. The fire has destroyed their only remaining hope of survival. A man, driven by his overwhelming love for his child, recklessly stole food. Unfortunately, he knocked over an oil lamp, causing a disaster. He confessed his crime and begged for death. The people were desperate, knowing that even if they didn't die from the living dead outside, they would starve to death. Faced with this situation, Lee Chang was silent, unsure of what to do. Inside Myeongsej, Seo Bai was studying the resurrection plant. She submerged it in water but didn't notice anything unusual. While talking with Baeum Pao, Jo Hak-ju suddenly appeared. Seo Bai was forced to admit to Jo Hak-ju that she knew how to use the resurrection plant to bring the dead back to life after reading her teacher's medical records. Jo Hak-ju wanted to take Seo Bai back to Hanyang with him, but before that, he needed to do one last thing. Back with the Crown Prince's group, to save all the people, Lee Chang realized he needed to act immediately and came up with a daring plan: sneak into Myeongsej and kill Jo Hak-ju. They needed to get past the hordes of living dead that were surrounding every level and layer of guards. This was the only plan in the current situation, so they quickly put it into action. A group of subordinates climbed down the wall, cutting themselves to lure the living dead. Smelling the blood, the creatures quickly swarmed from all directions, crowding and crushing each other to reach it. Taking advantage of the opportunity, a group secretly slipped out to find more food supplies. The Crown Prince's group followed the tunnel, where a subordinate had bravely sacrificed himself. His body was still pinned there, standing upright, his hands still gripping the sword that pierced his body. Enhyeon released him, so he could finally rest in peace. Then, they extinguished all the torches to avoid detection and dashed off like arrows in the night. Beforehand, they had meticulously planned their route, analyzing the number of soldiers and finding the weakest point in the defense. Lee Chang made his decision. I will kill Jo Hak-ju. He abandons the people to hunger and hardship, seizing what isn't his. I will convict him and reclaim my rightful place. I will save the people from hunger and poverty. I will survive and usher in a new world. In the 5th military training camp at Myeongsej, Seo Bai couldn't sleep. Holding the resurrection plant, she continued to study it. Suddenly, a familiar sound interrupted her thoughts, the groaning of the living dead. Xiao Bai immediately and secretly followed the soldiers carrying a large, suspicious-looking coffin. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince's group had reached the outside of the fortress walls. The first snow of the season began to fall. Using only a grappling hook, they successfully climbed up and secretly infiltrated the area. Without a sound, Yang Xin and Mu Yang quickly took out the soldiers in their path. Carefully parting a curtain, Yang Xin discovered that the tents were empty of soldiers. Only a few were outside, and they had already eliminated them. Sensing that something was wrong, Yang Xin and An Haiyan quickly ran to the Crown Prince. At this moment, Li Chang and Mu Yang were approaching Zhou Hakzhou's residence. Inside, he was already waiting. Xiao Bai, meanwhile, was entering a storage shed, clutching a hoe soaked in medicine as a weapon for defense. Cautiously, she approached the strange chest. The chest wasn't locked, and she slowly opened it. Inside, it was covered in blood and gore, and there was also a set of horns that had been removed, as if they had once confined a monster within. The Crown Prince entered the empty room, drops of blood from his sword dripping onto the floor. Suddenly, the door was locked from the outside. At the same time, the king's corpse, drawn by the smell of blood, charged forward, its grotesque head smashing through the door and roaring ferociously. As it turned out, Zhou Hakzhou had somehow foreseen their plan and had deliberately given them an easy path inside. An Haiyan, Mu Yang, and Yang Xin were blocked by soldiers outside. They had been lying in ambush for a long time. Xiao Bai heard the commotion and knew something was wrong, quickly running out to observe from outside. It was a pre-calculated scheme by Zhou Hakzhou. He appeared and announced that the king had personally come to Myeongseoj to punish the traitors. He tried to persuade An Haiyan to abandon the Crown Prince. Inside, Li Chang was fighting his father who had transformed into a monster alone. The corpse pursued him relentlessly, cornering him. The Crown Prince used his sword to block the attack. He called out to his father, but of course, there was no response. His father's hands gripped the sharp blade, the gushing blood further exciting the monster. The king lunged, attempting to bite his hand. Reacting swiftly, Li Chang dodged the attack, and the chase continued. Cornered again, the Crown Prince once more faced death. Suddenly, Li Chang saw an image of his father when he was healthy, his benevolent face slowly walking towards him. Memories of the past flooded back. The king had once told his son that he had lost everyone around him, and only he remained. He mustn't become like his father, but must live and become a true king. Father, it's Chang. Outside, everyone had been captured. Faced with Zhou Hakzhou's enticements, An Haiyan refused outright. 3 years ago, he had been deceived by Zhou Hakzhou, and since then, he hadn't had a single day of peace. His life was tormented by the sins he had committed. Although he had saved the country from the Japanese invaders, the events behind it were still a secret, and it had left a deep wound in An Haiyan's heart. He openly accused Zhou Hakzhou of resurrecting the deceased king to seize power, turning the king into a man-eating monster. At the same time, he declared that Crown Prince Li Chang was the rightful heir according to the law of the land. Stepping past the furious Zhou Hakzhou, he marched solemnly inside to rescue the Crown Prince. Zhou Hakzhou ordered his men to shoot An Haiyan. However, all the soldiers hesitated before the respected general. Seeing this, Zhou Hakzhou angrily drew his sword and killed a soldier, threatening another. If they didn't shoot, they would be killed. A bullet struck An Haiyan in the back, and he collapsed but struggled to stand up and move towards the door. He needed to remove the large wooden beam securing it to save the Crown Prince. The order was given, and all the soldiers acted, the sound of gunfire erupting. An Haiyan's body became a shield, riddled with crimson wounds, unable to withstand the onslaught. An Haiyan fell. Seemingly dead, he still tried to drag himself to the door, using all his remaining strength to open it. This was also the moment Li Chang severed his father's head. The head continued to spew blood, rolling across the floor. He collapsed completely, having killed his own father with his own hands. An Haiyan crawled to him, saying it wasn't his fault and calling him the king of the country. He used his last breath to embrace him one last time and whispered something before dying. His loyalty had been proven with his life. A patriotic general, caring for his people, dedicated to righteousness. Jo Hak-ju entered and saw the king's head. He wept a fake, theatrical cry of sorrow. His plan had succeeded. Li Chang killing the king with his own hands had been witnessed by all. He summoned the king's head and ordered the soldiers to arrest all the traitors. In Hanyang, the captain of the Royal Military Training Command, Min Kai-rak, decided to search Nisianye, the queen's private residence, due to the discovery of the corpses of pregnant women. Without fear or hesitation in the face of the powerful Heewon-cho clan, he was determined to investigate the truth behind the matter. Upon learning of this, the queen acted swiftly. That very night, palanquins were secretly carried out of Nisianye one by one. Min Kai-rak arrived just as they were leaving. He ordered a thorough search of every nook and cranny, despite the constant obstruction from the servants, but found nothing. All the rooms were clean and empty. Suddenly, he saw a suspicious area and went inside. Bloodstains on the floor, though carefully disguised, couldn't fool an experienced captain like him. Outside, the soldiers also discovered suspicious traces on the ground. Min Kai-rak ordered his men to quickly pursue and capture all the palanquin bearers. In the ensuing chaos, one of the palanquins overturned, revealing the corpses of the pregnant women who had been brutally murdered. There were a total of 7 pregnant women and their newborns. All the baby girls were dead. Min Kai-rak suspected that the killer only wanted baby boys. A bugle call interrupted their train of thought, signaling the king's passing. A somber atmosphere enveloped the entire royal palace. Everywhere there were cries of mourning and farewell. The king's body was wrapped and carefully placed in a coffin, and Hyan's body was also brought back. Despite being considered a traitor, he had rendered great service to the country during the war against the Japanese, so he was still buried with due ceremony. At this time, all attention was focused on the queen, who was about to give birth. If it was a prince, the child would ascend to the throne. The queen's birthing chamber was prepared with the utmost care. A royal physician was placed in the adjacent room. How could she give birth if she wasn't pregnant? Of course, she had to stage this whole charade. The investigation into the corpses needed to be carried out even more quickly, before she gave birth. At this time, Seo Bai arrived at the crown prince's place of confinement. Thanks to Bayam Pal's pass, she easily got past the guards under the pretext of checking his health. Unable to communicate directly, Li Chang used water spreading out to deliver a secret instruction to her. Young Shin and the remaining subordinates of Anhyeon were being held in a separate location. By now, they suspected that there was a spy leaking information to Jo Hak-ju, and they were planning to capture him before setting off for Hanyang. A small knife fell from Young Shin's sleeve. Mu Young was also isolated from everyone else in a different room. Outside, the soldiers were busy preparing to return to the capital. The Crown Prince's group was also being escorted out. As soon as they arrived at the prison and the soldiers opened the gate, Young Shin's group immediately attacked. One of Anhyeon's subordinates, trusting him, handed him back his gun. Since when had they become comrades? They quickly escaped and launched a direct assault on the enemy's crowded camp. Under cover, Young Shin accurately shot towards Jo Hak-ju from afar, but unexpectedly, a subordinate took the bullet for him. Fresh blood splattered everywhere. Young Shin's group was quickly subdued. Suddenly, terrified screams erupted from the soldiers. A corpse, impaled with something resembling the national flag on its back, appeared and attacked everyone. It was Lord Anhyeon himself. Everyone was terrified, even Jo Hak-ju. The blood on the corpses drew him in. Anhyeon charged forward, regardless of the rain of arrows and hail of bullets. He was still a valiant general, even in death. Flashing back to the moments before his death, Anhyeon had planned to transform himself into a monster to expose the truth. Seo Bai used the resurrection plant on his body and succeeded. Anhyeon lunged, tearing off a side of Jo Hak-ju's face. Fresh blood spurted out. Seo Bai couldn't bear to watch the scene. The Crown Prince looked on with grief at his teacher. Now, he had become a monster with blank white eyes, still holding a chunk of raw flesh in his mouth. Flashback to the battle against the Japanese army 3 years ago. After learning about the resurrection plant, Jo Hak-ju had come to find Anhyeon. Because it only worked on the newly deceased whose brains hadn't decayed, the resurrection plant couldn't be used on the corpses of soldiers who had been dead for a while. People were needed who would sacrifice themselves for this plan. However, they couldn't just kill and resurrect soldiers, as that would be wasteful. It would have to be civilians. And Hyan was furious at the suggestion and didn't believe in the absurd story. The difference in their ideals was clear, and Hyan fought to protect the people, while Jo Hak-ju wanted to maintain the royal family and the monarchy. As he prepared to leave, a corpse was released, lunging at Hyan. Fortunately, it was chained up. The bloodied, foul-smelling corpse snarled in his face. Being stabbed by a sword didn't faze it at all. While Hyan was still reeling, Jo Hak-ju said that with Joseon's 500 soldiers, they would surely be trampled by the 30,000 Japanese troops. Therefore, this was the only way to win. To save the country as well as all the people, Hyan painfully had to accept the plan. His men went to Mission Village, where young Shin was born, and killed all the inhabitants there. The village was desolate, filled with heartbreaking screams. They didn't understand what was happening, didn't understand what they had done wrong. Each person was strangled to death, without regard for age or size. The subordinates were deeply conflicted and heartbroken to be committing such cruel acts with their own hands. The truth about young Shin's past and grievances was revealed. Immediately afterward, they were resurrected as bloodthirsty monsters and swept through the entire Japanese army. The plan was successful. After the battle, Hyan painfully looked at the corpses strewn across the battlefield. He approached and carefully cradled the head of a dead villager and promised to repay this debt. He resigned from his official position and lived in seclusion for 3 years to mourn and hold memorial services for all of them. Now, he was just like them back then, transformed into a mindless monster. Back to the present, Jo Hak-ju had been bitten, blood and flesh smeared all over one side of his face. Lee Chang once again personally beheaded a loved one. And Hyan's head rolled to the ground to everyone's sorrow. Here, everyone witnessed Hyan die and come back to life. Seobai showed everyone the resurrection plant and the royal medical records, which had been entrusted to the head of the royal guard, Lee Gang-jun. The crown prince exposed the crimes of the He Won-cho family, that they had committed treason, were greedy and cruelly oppressed the people, and were the origin of the plague. At the same time, he asked the soldiers to join him in overthrowing the Cho family. After securing the cooperation of the military, the crown prince immediately began supplying food to the people trapped in Sangju Fortress, despite having to fight fiercely against the monsters. They used the previously discovered tunnel to transport food, but getting to that tunnel wasn't easy. Each food cart sprinted with a horde of bloodthirsty zombies behind it. On the other side of the river, as if signaled by a kite, the army provided support. A barrage of cannon fire rained down, targeting the zombie horde, sending dirt and flesh flying everywhere. The forest became a battlefield, with falling branches temporarily holding back the monsters. They piled on top of each other and screamed. On the Sangju Fortress side, the soldiers saw the target approaching the tunnel. They hastily prepared. The plan was successful. Each bag of food was transferred into the fortress. They were like lifelines for the people. The people inside the fortress couldn't believe this miracle. They cheered and rejoiced. Now they just needed to stay safe inside the fortress, and food would be supplied in this way. Meanwhile, the crown prince hadn't returned yet. In Myeongsi, Jo Hak-ju was still unconscious and being cared for by Seobai. Like Dan-I when he was bitten by the king, he didn't turn into a zombie. Only when people who had eaten human flesh were bitten did the plague spread. Baeum-pal begged Seobai to save his uncle, as he was family. As a physician, Seobai naturally couldn't abandon her patient. Moreover, treating him could help uncover the secret of the plague. Hearing that medicine was needed to keep him warm, Baeum-pal gave Seobai the precious herbs he had found for the queen. Seobai was shocked to discover it was sappanwood, a rare herb used to treat headaches, but not suitable for pregnant women. Knowing that the queen had been using it for a long time, Seobai suspiciously checked again. At this time, Lee Chang had also returned to Myeongsi after supplying the food. Suddenly, a subordinate reported that Jo Hak-ju had suddenly disappeared, and the soldiers guarding the door had all been killed. Worse still, Mu Young himself used the crown prince's name as an excuse to run away, taking Seobai and Baeum-pal with him. Mu Young's secret spying was exposed. On the night he left his pregnant wife to follow the crown prince to Dongni, the two infected individuals couldn't bear to part ways. Bayam-il arrived, and his smile vanished. Zhou Bayam-il had threatened to kill her if he didn't report the crown prince's every move. From the beginning of the series, it's clear that Mu Young loves his wife very much, giving her the best of everything and willing to do anything to protect her. Meanwhile, the crown prince was urgently pursuing them because if Zhou Hakju reached Hanyang, he would bring troops again, and the country's situation would become even more chaotic. Yang Xin offered to help, being a professional tiger hunter and very skilled at tracking. In Hanyang, the queen's subordinates were brutally interrogated, but she didn't reveal a word. Min Kai Rock received news that 3 palanquins hadn't been seized yet. He went to the queen's palace and discovered they were all there. The queen had moved first, sending the wet nurses to create false evidence. Min Kai Rock was arrested for invading a private area while the queen was in labor. On the way to Hanyang, Mu Young was forced to stop when Zhou Hakju's condition took a turn for the worse. While resting at a house, Zhou Hakju woke up and secretly told Bayam Pal something. After Xiao Bai returned with water, she couldn't find Bayam Pal anywhere. At this time, the crown prince, with Yang Xin's expert tracking skills, was about to catch up. But he hesitated to continue. He had realized Mu Young was a spy a while ago, but still wanted to believe in him. The guard who always stood shoulder to shoulder with him was also a brother, a family member. Li Chang had lost everyone by his side and didn't want anyone else to leave. At this time, Mu Young also sat dejectedly by the fire, unable to be happy when he had to do the impossible. Xiao Bai still thought the crown prince would come and anxiously asked him, but received only Mu Young's silence. Xiao Bai saw something was wrong, advised him, and told him the truth about the queen. Mu Young didn't believe it until he remembered the night he took his wife away. He saw there were many other pregnant women there. He brought medicine to ask Zhou Hakju, who had just woken up, but he didn't know anything about it either. At the same time, there was the sound of horses outside. Mu Young went out to investigate and suddenly an arrow came flying and pierced his chest. It turned out Zhou Hakju had ordered Bayam Pal to bring troops to save him. Mu Young had to fight the soldiers alone while injured, and the outcome was quickly decided. He used all his remaining strength to stand up, but the soldiers outside all shot arrows at him, and his back suddenly became a target. Close to death, Mu Young advised Xiao Bai to go with Bayam Pal if she wanted to save her life. Then, he dragged his wounded body into the forest, the fresh blood staining the white snow red. The crown prince found him, extremely worried, running so fast that he fell to the ground. Mu Young kept calling out to the crown prince as if to make up for the years to come. He apologized to him for everything. Li Chang frantically tried to treat him, but it was too late. The injuries were too severe. Before taking his last breath, Mu Young told the crown prince about the pregnant women and begged him to save his wife and unborn child. The crown prince hugged him and cried in pain. This was his last family member in this world. The forest was covered in a blanket of white snow, as cold as the bottom of his heart. At the same time, the sound of a baby's cry rang out in Hanyang. Mu Young's wife gave birth to a baby boy, who was immediately handed over to the queen. She schemed to claim the child as her own and put him on the throne in order to seize power, even from her own father, Zhou Hakju. Memories of a past night surfaced. At a table, a man was sound asleep, likely exhausted from a day of studying. A thief stealthily approached. But surprisingly, his target was the pastry on the table. It was none other than the guard Mu Young, who wanted to bring the pastry home for his wife. Looking up, he saw Li Chang waiting, already awake and watching him intently. Mu Young was terrified, bowing his head in admission and begging for forgiveness. Stealing from the crown prince was a crime punishable by death. Against his expectations, the crown prince had noticed him long ago, but hadn't reported him. Instead, he inquired about the well-being of his wife, and even suggested that Mu Young try it himself next time before bringing it home. Mu Young was deeply moved, swearing that he would always protect the crown prince, no matter the circumstances. Now, he was suffering because of his wife, violating the promise he made years ago. Returning to the present, Li Chang numbly embraced Mu Young's now cold body. His only remaining family was gone, but he couldn't falter. He had to suppress his grief and fight, completing his mission. Meanwhile, Zhou Hakju, who was bitten but didn't turn into a zombie, had returned to Hanyang, escorted by the army. His condition was extremely precarious. Bai recalled the characteristics of the infected. They craved flesh and blood and feared warmth, and they couldn't go underwater. They submerged Ju in a bathtub. Unexpectedly, his body reacted violently. However, he didn't regain consciousness until Bai submerged the entire bite wound underwater. Suddenly, parasitic worms emerged from Ju's cheek, and he was saved. At that moment, the bell announcing the queen's birth of a prince echoed throughout the palace. The aristocratic officials who followed the He Won-cho family were overjoyed. They quickly gathered, eager to curry favor and congratulate the queen, except for one man. He had once been loyal to the He Won-cho family, but that loyalty had been shaken by his upright nature and his investigations into the murdered pregnant women. He spoke out to the officials, but no one believed him, accusing him of disrespecting the queen with his suspicions. While recounting the investigation, Ju led troops in a surprise raid. He had heard everything and accused Min Kai-rak of slandering the royal family without evidence, declaring the crown prince and all his followers as rebels, and urging all officials to oppose them. Those who objected were threatened with a sword to their throats. The crown prince's group was rushing back to Hanyang. At Niseonye, the bodies of the remaining pregnant women were being disposed of. They needed to take care of them before sunrise. Suddenly, the crown prince's group burst in and subdued the subordinates. Looking at the bodies, all in their late stages of pregnancy, Mu Young's words before he died were true. A scream came from a nearby room. It was Mu Young's wife, desperately searching for her child. They managed to stop a subordinate from stabbing her just in time. The next morning, Ju ordered the execution and annihilation of all those who followed the crown prince. Their family members were arrested without exception, including children and women. Meanwhile, Bai saw young Shin on the road, disguised and blended into the crowd. Pal was terrified and advised Bai to leave. However, when he saw the image of an innocent child crying for her mother in panic, his heart was moved. Using the excuse of looking for herbs, Bai secretly followed young Shin and was led to where they were hiding Mu Young's wife, a deserted library near Hanyang. She was now out of danger but was still shocked and severely traumatized by the loss of her child. Bai told the crown prince about the worms that had parasitized the corpses and their eggs on the resurrection plant. The eggs hatched into worms inside the body, and they all parasitized the brain. However, there was still no way to cure the epidemic even after understanding the cause. The crown prince was pained to learn that such a small worm had turned the royal family upside down, disrupted the country, and caused so many deaths. He was determined to stop the epidemic and entrusted Bai with a secret mission. When she returned, Pal was anxiously waiting outside. He was very worried about her. Thanks to Pal speaking up for her merits, Bai requested Ju to become the queen's royal physician. At the same time, he also wanted to find out the secrets about the queen's actions behind his back. The next morning, Ju took her to meet the queen. At this moment, she was cradling the child, looking at it affectionately, cherishing it as if it were her own flesh and blood. Hearing that her father had arrived, she wasn't happy, but had to pretend to care, feigning concern about Ju's health and the state of the war. In response, he remained silent, staring intently at the baby in her arms. The two sat down for tea, and Ju revealed that the execution of the 3 generations of those traitors was just a trap to lure the crown prince. At the same time, he ordered Bai to take the queen's pulse. Of course, she didn't agree but couldn't disobey his order. Ju personally grabbed Bai's clothes and dragged her in front of the queen. His patience had reached its limit. Bai took the queen's pulse and discovered that she was having a false pregnancy and that the baby in her arms wasn't her own child. The queen's plot to seize power was exposed. One day, when she found out she had miscarried, with the help of her brother, the queen planned a false pregnancy and even hid it from her father, knowing that Ju would not accept a king without the family's bloodline. And what if he found out? Back to the present, Ju was scolding the queen for being evil, cunning, but stupid for almost destroying the family lineage. Ju asserted that he would put someone else on the throne, kill the child that very night, and everyone who knew the truth about the prince. He would turn the queen into a grieving mother for losing her child, using that as a reason to imprison her for life. As he was about to leave, he noticed something abnormal with his body, and a mouthful of fresh blood spurted out. He was shocked to realize that the queen had poisoned him with the tea earlier. Jo-Hak-ju died instantly, before he could even get close to her. His life had gone through countless battles, survived countless conspiracies in the royal palace, even the terrible epidemic, but unexpectedly, he died at the hands of his own daughter. The queen indifferently looked at her father's corpse. Just because she was a woman, she was always looked down upon. Now she had everything, the family and the country. His body was taken away, and a grand funeral was held. Perhaps Bayam-pal was the only one saddened by his death. Rumors spread far and wide that the chief state counselor had died from the epidemic, and no one could have imagined that the truth behind it was so bitter. On Ganghwa Island, a strange man in ragged clothes was leisurely fishing. He was still sleepy and fussing about the cold, but he noticed Li Chang behind him from the moment he arrived. He complained that food was incredibly precious to the common people, while the court was only concerned with fighting for power. Suddenly, the fishing rod next to him moved, and he frantically grabbed Li Chang, trying to pull it in, but because the force was too strong, the small rod snapped. He waved his hand, intending to hit the crown prince, while shooing him away for losing his precious fish. Just as he was about to leave, a call of "Uncle" made the old man freeze. This old man was a descendant of Prince Nisian, a minor branch of the royal family. He carried royal blood, but it had long been forgotten. To him, that blood was as ordinary as the common people. There was no difference. The crown prince wanted to persuade him to return, but it was not promising. Returning to Yongshin, who was waiting, he informed Li Chang that the followers of the crown prince would be executed the next day. The crown prince asked why Yongshin remained loyal to him, when both Jo-Hak-jo and In-hyeon were dead, and Yongshin had avenged his village, which was his initial purpose for following the crown prince. Yongshin replied that, even though they were dead, the country was still in turmoil and the people were still starving. He believed the crown prince would change it and establish a new order for Joseon. Back in Hanyang, the queen appointed Bayam-pal as the commander of the royal guard, ordering the palace guards to protect the royal palace and ordering him to execute anyone who followed the crown prince. Bayam-pal didn't forget to plead for Seo-bai, and the queen said she had released her. The truth was, Seo-bai was locked up next to the undead, hidden by the queen. She was plotting to use her father's methods to fight for power. She ordered Seo-bai to further study the undead and the plague. Seo-bai, terrified, huddled in a corner of the dark and frightening prison. Meanwhile, at a library on the outskirts of Hanyang, Li Chang was gathering troops to prepare for a rescue. The next morning, on a mountainside, Commander Lee Gang-jun held the king's medical records, choosing the path he would take: loyalty to the country or protecting his family. Meanwhile, in Hanyang, among those being taken to be executed was Min Kai Rock, and mournful cries echoed throughout the streets. A child was being dragged on the ground, followed by their mother, who was constantly pleading. These were Lee Gang-jun's wife and child. Seeing their father, the child kept calling out to him, but was immediately silenced by the mother. If they were discovered, it would implicate him. They were all taken to an animal slaughterhouse. The butcher sharpened his knives with a grating sound, and chunks of red meat were being chopped up. This was also the future of all those innocent people. Lee Gang-jun had revealed the crown prince's hiding place to the court in exchange for the safety of his family. In the royal palace, the queen was extremely pleased that Li Chang had delivered himself into a death trap. Soldiers immediately stormed the abandoned library according to Lee Gang-jun's report. As soon as they arrived, they attacked, with a dense rain of arrows firing. Strangely, there wasn't a single scream. They broke down the door and realized there was no one inside. It turned out it was a trick to keep the royal army out of the city. Lee Gang-jun had chosen to be loyal to the crown prince to protect the country. Meanwhile, at the city gate, Li Chang and his subordinates boldly entered through the main gate. He ordered all the city gates closed. It was too late for the royal army to return. At the execution site, Cho Bayam-pal was reading the execution decree. Before he could finish, he stopped abruptly, overwhelmed by the mournful cries of everyone there. Because with any group, you can't look at it and judge each individual. Bayam-pal came from the He-Won-cho clan, but he still possessed a compassionate heart. He threw the decree away, unable to order the execution. Bayam Pal's timidity and childishness were evident throughout the whole show. But in the end, he chose to save those strangers, even though he might have to pay with his life for disobeying orders. The Crown Prince arrived and said, "You have done very well. I will return to my rightful position. Will you come with me?" Everyone knelt down before the future king of the country. The prisoners were released, including Min Kai Rak, and along with Cho Bayam Pal, both of them pledged their loyalty to the Crown Prince. They were all prepared for one last attempt to overthrow the He Won Cho clan. The officials in the court were like they were sitting on hot coals. A palace maid beside the queen consort fearfully rushed to report, but she remained remarkably calm, seemingly orchestrating a pre-planned scheme as she expressed her desire to welcome Li Chang at the main hall. The Crown Prince, with his formidable forces, was brazenly advancing towards the royal palace. Lord Minister of War, formerly loyal to the He Won Cho clan, was already waiting to greet him. It turned out that Li Gangjun had previously met with him, witnessed the king's medical records, and understood the full truth. Being a man of integrity, he swore allegiance to the Crown Prince. He had dealt with the remaining military forces and was prepared to escort him into the palace. Two of the most powerful royal forces, the Royal Guard Command and the Inner Military Garrison, had sided with the Crown Prince. In the prison, Li Gangjun was quickly released and ready to fight. He encountered Chief Scholar Kim Sun in a nearby prison cell. His body was covered in wounds from excessive torture. Upon hearing the news of the Crown Prince's return, he seemed to find a renewed hope for survival. Back with the Crown Prince, he and his army had entered the palace. The cowardly officials were already lined up, waiting. Upon seeing him, they wept and pleaded, shifting all blame onto Jo Hak Ju and the queen consort. What a group of deceitful opportunists, always catering to the prevailing wind. The army easily advanced to the main hall without breaking a sweat. On the throne, the queen consort, dressed in a deep red phoenix robe, was waiting. She was holding the child that wasn't her own flesh and blood. The two finally came face to face. The queen consort scoffed that he had forgotten how to bow to her and refused to abdicate. She called Li Chang a traitor for beheading their father, asserting that the throne belonged to her son, the true heir to the king. However, the officials questioned whether the child was truly the queen consort's and demanded a thorough investigation. The matter of the murdered pregnant women and baby girls was a question that she obviously couldn't answer. She shrieked that they dared question the child's bloodline. "I'm not forcing you off the throne because of your He Won Cho lineage, nor is it because I covet that position. The throne comes with duty and responsibility. The people consider food as heaven, and the king must serve the people as if serving heaven," the Crown Prince declared resolutely, pressing her to abdicate with his sword. However, the queen consort remained incredibly defiant, sneering. The officials suggested simply drafting a royal decree in the queen consort's name, announcing the Crown Prince's ascension to the throne, affixing the royal seal, and that would settle everything. However, the queen consort switched to, "If I can't have it, no one can" mode. She ordered the palace maids to release the zombies she had been secretly keeping locked up. Xiao Bai, still blindfolded, was imprisoned in a jail near the zombies. She relentlessly rubbed the ropes binding her hands against a rock to break free. Suddenly, a piercing scream rang out. Through the cloth, she couldn't see anything, but it was enough to realize that the monsters had escaped and were attacking the palace maid who opened the door. Once again, a bloody battle unfolded within the royal palace. Xiao Bai successfully broke the ropes. The surroundings were silent and empty. Only the torch that had fallen to the ground provided the only light. Fumbling for the keys, she escaped from the prison cell. Running through the basement with its complex maze of passages, the moment she saw the light was also the moment that terrified screams echoed throughout the palace. An official went to retrieve the royal seal from the deceased queen, only to find her corpse being viciously torn apart by two undead creatures. He awoke with a start, screaming for the living, a gaping bite wound in his abdomen exposing his entrails. Witnessing the horrific scene and realizing the gravity of the situation, Xiao Bai immediately went to find the Crown Prince. An official entered the inner chamber, and a living corpse awaited him. Shocked and disbelieving sounds, along with the crash of breaking furniture, echoed from within. A bloodied sword pierced through the door. After a struggle, the official burst out, a bloodthirsty undead creature hot on his heels. Reaching a dead end, the undead lunged and bit him, the sword already lodged in his stomach, impaling them both against the wall. Screams reverberated throughout the royal palace, reaching the crown prince's group. They drew their weapons, on high alert. The haughty queen sat upon her throne, waiting to enjoy the spectacle. At this moment, Bai arrived. She warned the crown prince that a plague was spreading through the palace. The crown prince immediately ordered all gates to be locked and rapidly prepared the troops for battle, as the infected would easily overwhelm them, and their numbers would only continue to increase. Regardless of status, be they nobles or commoners, all were to be beheaded. The undead were everywhere in the palace, attacking the living in hordes. A large, portly royal cook was single-handedly holding them off, swinging a pot lid in wide arcs, protecting the terrified court ladies behind him. However, they were too many, and they were quickly overwhelmed. Bai and a group of subordinates took refuge in the royal chambers with the queen. Unlike everyone else, she remained completely calm, soothing the baby. In the queen's chambers, a group of court ladies discovered the two corpses impaled together, the two officials from earlier. Min Kai Rock appeared and dispatched them with arrows simultaneously piercing their heads. Not stopping there, more undead charged forward to attack. They had to fight while protecting those who had not yet been infected. Ironically, a young man was caught on the toilet, disturbed by the commotion outside. "Seriously, it already stinks in here, and now I'm being disturbed," he muttered, repeatedly telling whoever was outside that the stall was occupied. But there was no one sane out there, and the latrine door was quickly smashed open, revealing bloodied corpses peering in. The young man, still mid-squat, recoiled in horror, with nowhere to escape but the cesspool of excrement. Outside, the crown prince's group continued to fiercely battle the horde of undead. Li Chang cleaved through the monsters' necks, while Min Kai Rock, with his archery skills, accurately targeted their heads. Dust filled the air. Young Shin, with his small knife, maniacally slashed and stabbed. Cho Bayam Pal was pinned beneath an undead creature, when young Shin immediately grabbed a spear and impaled it through the neck. Blood gushed out, showering the unfortunate Bayam Pal. But it still wasn't over. Young Shin braced himself and stomped down hard, driving the spear deeper, and Bayam Pal's face was now completely covered in red, with blood even spilling into his throat. At that point, I was worried he'd get infected too, but luckily he was okay. With only 2 remaining undead in the area, they dispatched them with simultaneous arrow shots and moved on to fight in another area. In the ancestral hall of the kings who founded the nation, 2 eunuchs were preserving historical records. The undead outside closed in, and they embraced each other, awaiting their deaths. Fresh blood splattered across the portraits of the kings. Outside, the battle raged on. Both the infected and the uninfected were stained a uniform crimson with blood. Bayam Pal hacked down several undead creatures. Young Shin covered his back, using the butt of his gun to smash the head of an attacker. A horrifying sight unfolded as a corpse was dragging a man's tongue out of his mouth. Barely had he looked up when Min Kai Rock shot an arrow clean through one of its eyes. To conserve ammunition, he retrieved the arrow and continued to shoot another corpse dead. A monster attacked from behind. The crown prince instantly killed it, saving him. Their coordination was incredibly precise and graceful. The horde of living dead was quickly cleared. Before they could even celebrate, the doors burst open, and a legion of monsters poured in like a tidal wave. Here, they could be seen in all shapes and sizes, from large to small. And notably, they were all nobles. In previous battles, the living dead had been commoners. The screenwriter showed that class divisions had been removed. No matter who they were, whether humble or noble, once infected, they were all just filthy, senseless monsters, craving flesh and blood. Lord Minister of War sacrificed himself, using his body to block the door, carving out a path of blood for the crown prince, but it was useless. They were too many. The crown prince's group was forced to retreat into another palace hall. The horde of living dead swarmed outside. Night slowly fell, and crows circled in flocks across the sky, calling mournful, deathly cries. Inside the main hall, finding the surrounding screams had ceased, a soldier intended to open the doors when suddenly a horde of the undead descended. Shadows swarmed, crimson handprints were stamped onto the doors. They were all utterly exhausted after a day of fighting. The queen calmly remained seated on her throne. Night fell upon the palace while the battle raged fiercely. Min Kai Rock suggested that everyone sacrifice themselves to clear a path for the crown prince to escape, protecting the outside world from the plague, but he flatly refused. The doors to the royal chamber were quickly breached, bloody heads poking through. The soldiers tried to shoot the closest corpses, but to no avail. Xiao Bai remembered that they feared fire, quickly smashing a lamp in the hall, creating a defensive barrier, and tearing cloth to set ablaze. The queen coldly told her father, whom she had personally sent to the afterlife, "In the end, I still haven't been robbed of my throne." Calmly, she welcomed the corpses as they lunged to bite and tear at her. Xiao Bai, struggling with the undead on one side, suddenly heard a baby crying. Seemingly, the undead didn't care about it. Xiao Bai quickly embraced the baby, then quickly escaped by wrapping herself in a burning cloak. On the other side, Min Kai Rock stubbornly insisted on clearing a path for the crown prince to escape. He suggested heading to the rear garden. Hearing this, Li Chang remembered something. He and his father had once conversed in the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Asking about the few remaining bullets, he had a plan. He ordered everyone to go everywhere in the palace, using blood to lure the undead. They moved on the rooftops to ensure safety. The timid Bayam Pal didn't dare to hurt himself, so Yong Shin helped, cutting him. A soldier carelessly slipped and fell, immediately being buried by the undead. Bayam Pal once again panicked, slipped, and hung dangling from the rooftop. Fortunately, Yong Shin was nearby and shot the head of a corpse lunging toward him, saving his life. It was snowing, the rooftops were very slippery, and another soldier fell and quickly passed away. Facing Li Chang was a horde of undead that had somehow climbed onto the roof. He had to maintain his balance while fighting them. Barely managing to deal with one group, another group charged up, this time even larger than before. Realizing their weight was causing the roof to sway, the crown prince used all his strength to stab at the roof tiles. The entire group fell, and he escaped. Barely able to catch his breath, a corpse lunged from behind, only to be swiftly dealt with by Min Kai Rock, who had just arrived. They were leading all of the infected to the lake in the back garden. Outside, Chief Scholar Kim Sun and the others still didn't understand what was happening inside the palace. Xiao Bai was hiding with the baby in a storage shed. The horde of the infected had been lured away, leaving the area eerily quiet. As she was about to open the door to go outside, she suddenly heard a baby crying. Her hand was also stained red with fresh blood. The baby was still alive and had a wound on its arm. Back with the crown prince and his group, they were urgently heading towards the back garden. He was determined to stop them. Reaching the lake shore, they simultaneously fired rockets towards the pavilion in the middle of the lake, the blaze lighting up the entire area. By this time, the lake surface had frozen over. They hurriedly made their way towards the pavilion, weapons at the ready. A scream made everyone raise their guard. It turned out to be just the foolish Bayam Pal, who clumsily tripped and slid all the way across the ice. He truly was the comic relief of the entire movie. Before they could even celebrate, the horde of the infected swarmed forward. As they ran on the ice, the crown prince ordered his gunmen to use all their ammunition to shoot at the ice, attempting to break it. At this point, they realized Li Chang's plan. However, some of the infected were running very quickly. They needed to split up their forces to fight them. The ice was too thick and too difficult to break. The weapons of that time were rudimentary, and the guns took a long time to reload. They all fought valiantly, but were quickly overwhelmed by the numbers. They were too many, and human strength had its limits. Moreover, they had been fighting non-stop for an entire day. The infected continued to pour in. Even the queen was there, her tattered phoenix robe dragging behind her. Soldiers fell one after another, all bitten, including the crown prince himself. It wouldn't be long before they were infected and lost all consciousness. Determined to fight to his last breath, to the last flicker of his mind, the crown prince continued to try to break the ice at any cost. He used his gun, but it ran out of ammunition. Using the gun handle didn't work either. Finally, he used his bare fists. Blood from his hand stained the ice red, but he felt no pain. Looking around, everyone was being mauled. The queen's corpse was frantically devouring one person after another. Min Kai Rock, Yong Shin, and even Bayampal were not spared. In that seemingly hopeless moment, the crown prince saw a supersized, gigantic infected person running towards him. He immediately regained his resolve, continuing to punch the ice. He rushed forward, pushed it down, and successfully used the infected's weight. The ice began to crack, from a small fissure to the entire lake surface, submerging everything. In the water, parasitic worms crawled out, and the survivors gradually regained consciousness. They quickly swam up and escaped. A spectacular survival. Beneath the ice, countless corpses were frozen in every conceivable shape. When dawn broke, the crown prince emerged from the palace. At this point, only a handful of his followers had survived. Former chief scholar Kim Sun and Li Gangjun were waiting and welcomed him. All paid respect to the crown prince as a new king. Li Chang ordered all the soldiers guarding the city walls to enter the palace. They needed to clear away the corpses. Along the lake shore, countless corpses were being retrieved. Since there were no more parasitic worms, they were now just normal, motionless corpses. They collected name tags to identify the dead. Among them was the golden phoenix hairpin belonging to the queen. They picked it up and pondered for a long time, a fitting end for bottomless greed. Bayampal was frantically searching for Xiao Bai, having not seen her in a long time. The corpses all had to be beheaded before burial. Meanwhile, the crown prince was recounting everything to chief scholar Kim Sun. The scholar was aghast to hear that the plague had ravaged the palace and killed everyone. Min Kai Rak approached, reporting that the newborn prince's body could not be found. Choosing between Li Chang and the surviving child was not an easy decision. Kim Sun argued that if Li Chang wanted to ascend the throne, he would have to kill the child. And if the child lived, nobles aligned with the He Wan Chou family would exploit him to incite rebellion against Li Chang. Outside, Yong Xin was searching for any sign of Xiao Bai. He spotted her acupuncture kit on the ground and reached for it, only to have the corpse beside it lunge at him with a snarl. It was unable to move properly. Yong Xin quickly delivered a fatal blow to its head. The crown prince went to the ancestral shrine. There, he discovered Xiao Bai hiding behind a throne, cradling the baby. By now, the child had been bitten. Xiao Bai had soaked the bite in water, swearing that the child wouldn't turn into a monster. She begged the crown prince to spare the child's life because he was Mu Yong's son, and Li Chang had promised to protect both mother and child. Ultimately, Li Chang couldn't bring himself to kill an innocent child. He ordered that it be recorded in the annals that the crown prince had died of the plague. At the same time, he ensured that all those loyal to him would protect the child and raise the new king well. 7 years later, the plague had passed, and Joseon was at peace under a new king, Li Yung. After performing an ancestral rite, the young king met one Jew who had returned from exile. The king wanted to know more about his family, who were said to have died from the plague 7 years prior. One Jew replied that everything from that era had been sealed away. As the king returned to his residence, he passed his mother, who had entered the palace as a court lady. On his way home, Bayampal, now a high-ranking official, happened to run into Yong Xin on the streets of Hanyang. After so long, they decided to grab a drink and catch up. Bayampal wondered what had happened to the crown prince and Xiao Bai. Yong Xin gave him Xiao Bai's notes from her research on the resurrection plant and the plague. Bayampal was surprised that Xiao Bai was still researching the disease. Yong Xin revealed that on one of their trips, they discovered resurrection plants growing all over the country. Once, an elder revealed that his villagers were cultivating it. He explained that his son had bought the seeds from a Chinese man. Yong Xin added that whoever was selling the seeds was also telling the villagers exactly how to use the plant. Li Chang requested that Yong Xin return to Hanyang to warn Bayampal to be on guard for a new outbreak. Meanwhile, Li Chang was traveling north to find the seed seller, far from the capital, in Hamgyong province. Li Chang and Xiao Bai entered an abandoned village, where Xiao Bai found a sprig of the resurrection plant. The group was startled by an infected corpse with a bell tied to its ankle. More bells sounded. In a nearby shed, a mysterious woman appeared, surrounded by shackled corpses. Back in Hanyang, inexplicably, parasitic worms were wriggling on the young king's body.